The printed WhatsApp messages lay scattered across the hospital bed like fragments of a shattered life. Each timestamp told its own story of betrayal. 2:47 a.m., 11:23 p.m., 3:15 a.m. The kind of hours when honest people sleep, but secrets flourish in the darkness. When Marwan Khalil's sister Layla found these papers in her mailbox 3 days after his funeral, she knew her brother had orchestrated his final move from beyond the grave. "If anything happens to me," the handwritten note read in Marwan's careful script, "start with these two." But this story doesn't begin with death. It begins 6 months earlier, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Al-Qasais, where the morning call to prayer drifted through thin walls and the scent of cardamom tea couldn't quite mask the smell of disappointment that had settled into the furniture like dust. Marwan Khalil had never imagined his life would unfold this way. At 43, he should have been hitting his stride, a warehouse manager with steady income, a wife who still laughed at his jokes, maybe even children running through the small rooms that now felt too big for just the two of them. Instead, he spent his days counting inventory and his nights counting the ways his marriage had quietly died without anyone bothering to hold a funeral. The back injury that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment Marwan was directing the placement of a shipping container. The next he was face down on the warehouse floor, his spine screaming protests that echoed through every nerve in his body. The MRI showed 3 herniated discs and muscle damage that would require months of careful recovery. The doctor's orders were simple: complete bed rest, physical therapy 3 times a week, and absolutely no heavy lifting. What the doctor didn't mention was how vulnerability could strip away everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. Yasmin had been the perfect wife during their courtship 12 years ago. 23 then, working as a receptionist at a dental clinic, saving money to help her family back in Amman. Marwan fell in love with her laugh first, the way it filled empty spaces and made even their cramped studio apartment feel like a palace. She used to wake up early to pack his lunch, leaving little notes in Arabic tucked between the sandwiches. "My strength," she would call him. "My mountain." Mountains, apparently, were only impressive until they showed cracks. The change had been subtle, starting months before the injury but accelerating dramatically after Marwan was confined to bed. Yasmin began working longer hours at the accounting firm where she'd found a better position. She enrolled in evening English classes, started going to a gym in Dera. She developed new habits that seemed innocent enough in isolation but formed a pattern that made Marwan's chest tighten with unspoken questions. Her phone was always face down now, even when charging. She developed the habit of taking calls in the kitchen with the door closed, her voice dropping to whispers he couldn't quite make out through the thin walls. New clothes appeared in her wardrobe, things she claimed were on sale but still carried the crisp fold lines of expensive boutiques. The new perfume that appeared on her dresser was something floral and complex that she said was a gift from her sister, though her sister lived in Jordan and hadn't visited in 2 years. But it was during his recovery that Marwan truly began to understand how isolation could sharpen a man's perception. Confined to their bedroom, dependent on Yasmin for everything from preparing meals to helping him to the bathroom, he had nothing but time to notice the details that a healthy, busy husband might have missed. The way she hurried through their conversations now, as if his presence was an inconvenience to be managed rather than cherished. How she'd stopped asking about his pain levels or recovery progress, offering only perfunctory care that felt more like duty than devotion. And then there was Fawaz al-Rashid, who had become the most frequent visitor during Marwan's recovery. Fawaz had been Marwan's closest friend since their university days in Amman, back when they were both young men with grand plans and empty pockets. While Marwan chose the steady path of logistics and warehousing, Fawaz had always been drawn to uniforms and authority. He joined the Dubai police 12 years ago and worked his way up to a beat officer position in their district. 41 now, still unmarried, claiming he was married to the job. He was the kind of friend who remembered birthdays, who showed up with food during Ramadan, who had been the best man at Marwan and Yasmin's wedding. The kind of friend who visited frequently during Marwan's recovery, always asking how he was feeling, always offering to help Yasmin with errands or household tasks that Marwan could no longer perform, always so concerned, always so helpful, always so present in their lives during Marwan's weakest moments. Fawaz would arrive after his shifts, still in uniform, bringing groceries that Yasmin had supposedly requested. He'd sit beside Marwan's bed, sharing stories from the police station, asking about the warehouse, being the perfect concerned friend. But Marwan began to notice how Fawaz's eyes followed Yasmin around the apartment, how their conversations continued in the kitchen while Marwan dozed fitfully in bed, how the laughter that had disappeared from his marriage seemed to resurface whenever Fawaz was around. From his position by the bedroom window, Marwan had an unobstructed view of the building's entrance and the small courtyard below. It had become his world, this rectangle of glass that framed his daily existence. He watched neighbors coming and going, delivery drivers navigating the narrow parking spaces, children playing football in the small courtyard below. Soon, this window would show him something that would change the course of 3 lives forever. But for now, as September stretched into October and his back slowly healed, Marwan simply watched and wondered why the 2 people he trusted most in the world seemed to be sharing a secret that didn't include him. The bedroom window became Marwan's unwitting prison and his unexpected salvation. Each morning, as Yasmin hurried through her routine of checking his medication schedule and preparing his breakfast, he would settle into the chair beside the window with his walking cane propped against the wall. The doctor had been clear about his limitations. No lifting, no sudden movements, no extended periods standing. What the doctor hadn't anticipated was how these restrictions would transform a wounded man into an inadvertent detective. October brought a new rhythm to their household. Yasmin's absences grew longer and more frequent, always with perfectly reasonable explanations. The accounting firm needed her to work late. Her English classes had expanded to include weekend sessions. The gym had introduced new morning programs that better suited her schedule. Each excuse arrived wrapped in concern for his recovery, delivered with the kind of solicitous care that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. During these extended periods alone, Marwan developed an intimate knowledge of their building's daily patterns. Mrs. Ahmed from the 3rd floor always left for her cleaning job at exactly 7:30 a.m. The Pakistani delivery driver who brought groceries emerged from his van with practiced efficiency. Children gathered in the courtyard after school, their football matches creating a soundtrack of laughter that reminded Marwan of his own childhood in Amman. But it was the police patrol car that began appearing with increasing frequency that first caught his attention. Initially, Marwan felt reassured seeing the familiar white and green vehicle parked near their building entrance. It was only after several weeks of observation that he began to notice the timing. The patrol car arrived on the same days Yasmin claimed to have extended work commitments. It stayed for roughly an hour, always parked in the same spot where the driver remained partially hidden from the main road. The revelation came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Yasmin had left 2 hours earlier for what she described as an important client meeting that might run late. She'd taken extra care with her appearance that day, choosing the yellow dress Marwan had bought her for Eid and applying makeup with the kind of attention she'd once reserved for their anniversary dinners. Marwan was struggling with the new pain medication his physiotherapist had prescribed. The pills made him drowsy but didn't quite eliminate the sharp protests from his lower back. He'd been dozing fitfully when the sound of car doors slamming jolted him awake. Reaching for his walking cane, he pulled himself upright and moved slowly toward the window, his spine sending familiar warnings with each step. What he saw below froze him completely. Yasmin stood near the building entrance, but she wasn't alone. The man beside her wore the unmistakable uniform of Dubai police. Even from 3 floors above, Marwan recognized the way Fawaz carried himself. Shoulders straight, head slightly tilted when he listened, hands animated when he spoke. But it wasn't Fawaz's presence that shattered Marwan's world. It was the way Yasmin moved toward him with the fluid familiarity of lovers reuniting. Her body language spoke a language Marwan had learned to read over 12 years of marriage. But now she was speaking it to someone else. She fit against Fawaz's chest as if that space had been carved specifically for her. His hand found the curve of her waist with practiced intimacy, while hers rested against his uniform shirt with casual ownership. When Fawaz tilted her chin upward and kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness, Marwan's walking cane slipped from his grip and clattered against the window frame. The sound echoed through the bedroom like a gunshot, but the couple below remained lost in their private moment, oblivious to the man whose life they were destroying 3 floors above. The physical pain that shot through Marwan's back as he gripped the windowsill was nothing compared to the emotional devastation flooding his chest. His legs trembled, and he had to steady himself against the wall to avoid falling. 20 years of friendship and 12 years of marriage collapsed into a single moment of terrible clarity. That evening, when Yasmin returned with stories about traffic delays and demanding clients, Marwan said nothing. He accepted her perfunctory kiss and smiled when she asked about his therapy exercises. But when she retreated to the kitchen, he began planning his investigation. The opportunity came 2 days later when Yasmin announced errands that would take most of the afternoon. The moment her footsteps faded in the stairwell, Marwan began the painful process of reaching her phone in the living room. Each step required careful planning, his cane providing essential support as he navigated furniture that had become obstacles in his limited world. The phone wasn't password protected, a detail that now seemed deliberately careless rather than trusting. What Marwan found in her WhatsApp conversations with F destroyed any remaining hope. 3 months of messages revealed a relationship that had progressed from flirtation to emotional dependency to physical intimacy. Voice notes where Yasmin called Fawaz Habibti and Rohi, the same terms of endearment she'd once reserved for her husband. Photos taken at Jumeirah Beach showing them embracing against a sunset backdrop. The final piece of evidence was a video showing Yasmin laughing as waves crashed around her feet. She looked younger, happier, more alive than she'd appeared in their apartment for months. The timestamp showed it had been recorded the previous weekend, when she claimed to be attending a work conference. As Marwan carefully returned the phone to its charging station, his hands shaking with pain medication and emotional trauma, he realized that his injury had given him something unexpected: time, isolation, and the perfect cover for planning what would come next. The nights became Marwan's enemy. Pain medication that once promised relief now felt like a chemical prison, dulling his physical agony while sharpening every emotional edge until his thoughts cut like broken glass. He would lie in bed, listening to Yasmin's peaceful breathing beside him, and wonder how someone could sleep so soundly while living such an elaborate lie. The darkness amplified everything: the throb in his lower back, the echo of Fawaz's laugh from the kitchen, the memory of his wife's head resting against another man's chest with the familiarity of true intimacy. Sleep, when it came, brought no mercy. His dreams were populated by scenes he'd witnessed and conversations he'd imagined, playing on an endless loop that left him exhausted before dawn. He would wake to find Yasmin already gone, having left early for work with barely a goodbye kiss that felt like charity from a nurse attending to an inconvenient patient. The isolation pressed against him like a weight, made heavier by the knowledge that his condition had driven away even well-meaning friends who found sick visits uncomfortable reminders of their own mortality. Marwan began to understand why some men broke completely when their bodies betrayed them. The walking cane beside his bed wasn't just a mobility aid, it was a symbol of everything he could no longer be. The husband who could protect his wife, the friend who could confront betrayal face to face, the man who could walk away from a situation that was killing him slowly, one whispered conversation and stolen glance at a time. Instead, he was trapped in a body that had failed him, watching his life disintegrate from behind a bedroom window like a prisoner observing freedom through bars. The self-blame came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. Perhaps if he'd been stronger, more successful, more attentive. Perhaps if he hadn't let the injury define him, hadn't become so dependent on Yasmin's care. Perhaps if he'd been the kind of man who inspired loyalty rather than pity, Fawaz would never have dared to cross the line from friend to predator. The medication made these thoughts circular and inescapable, a mental maze with no exit except the growing certainty that something had to change. But isolation, Marwan discovered, could also be a teacher. Stripped of the distractions of work and social obligations, forced to confront the raw truth of his situation without escape, he began to see possibilities that a healthier, busier man might have missed. His injury had made him invisible in his own life, but invisibility could be a weapon if wielded correctly. His bedridden state had given him time to observe, to plan, to prepare for a confrontation that would catch his betrayers completely off guard. The letter took him 3 days to write, his handwriting made shaky by pain medication but his purpose growing clearer with each revision. He addressed it to his sister Layla in Amman, including copies of the WhatsApp messages, photographs of the evidence, and a detailed timeline of the affair. "If you are reading this," he wrote in his careful Arabic script, "then something has happened to me. The truth about Yasmin and Fawaz must be known. Justice must be served, even if I cannot be there to see it." Carefully, methodically, Marwan began reducing his pain medication despite the protests from his damaged spine. Clear thinking required sacrifice, and he needed every faculty sharp for what was coming. He practiced moving without the cane, testing his limits, measuring his endurance. The garage beneath their building became his target, accessible, private, and symbolic. It was where he parked the car that represented his independence, his ability to provide for his family. It seemed fitting that it would also be where he reclaimed his dignity. The physiotherapy exercises that had once felt like torture became training. Marwan pushed himself through stretches and movements that sent lightning through his nervous system. But each successful session was proof that he could do what needed to be done. He researched, planned, and prepared with the thoroughness that had made him successful in logistics management. This was simply another complicated delivery that required precise timing and flawless execution. On a Tuesday morning in late November, as Yasmin prepared for another day of deception, Marwan made his decision. She kissed his forehead with mechanical affection and reminded him that she might be late again. Another client meeting, another plausible excuse in her expanding repertoire of lies. After her footsteps faded in the stairwell, Marwan reached for his phone. "Brother," he said when Fawaz answered, injecting his voice with the kind of weakness that came naturally after months of invalidism. "I need your help. Something's wrong with my car in the garage, and I can't manage the stairs alone. Could you meet me there after your shift? I hate to ask, but there's no one else." Fawaz's response was everything Marwan had expected. Immediate concern, promises to come right away, the kind of solicitous friendship that masked betrayal behind a uniform and a badge. "Of course, Aki. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't try to go down alone." Marwan hung up and reached for his walking cane, testing its weight in his hand. The metal was cold, solid, reassuring. For months it had been a symbol of his weakness, but today it would serve a different purpose. He pulled himself upright, each movement deliberate and controlled despite the familiar protests from his back. The elevator descended slowly, carrying him toward a confrontation that would end one way or another. As the garage doors opened and fluorescent lights flickered to life, Marwan understood that he was no longer the broken man who had watched his life collapse from a bedroom window. He was a man who had found purpose in planning, strength in strategy, and justice in his own hands. The walking cane tapped against concrete as he made his way to his car, each echo counting down the minutes until Fawaz arrived for their final conversation. The underground garage smelled of motor oil and concrete dust, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between the parked cars. Marwan had arrived early, positioning himself beside his aging Toyota Camry, with his walking cane planted firmly on the ground like a flagpole marking his territory. Each breath sent sharp reminders through his spine, but his mind remained crystal clear for the first time in months. The reduced medication had lifted the pharmaceutical fog, leaving him with painful clarity about what was about to unfold. When Fawaz's patrol car descended the ramp, its headlights swept across the garage like searchlights hunting prey. The engine's echo in the confined space sounded ominous. Final. Marwan watched his former best friend emerge from the vehicle, still wearing the uniform that had once represented protection and justice. Now it looked like a costume worn by an actor who had forgotten his lines. "Be careful, Marwan," Fawaz called out, his voice carrying the practiced concern of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "You shouldn't be down here with your back. Why didn't you wait for me upstairs?" The words hit Marwan like physical blows. This was the same voice that had whispered endearments to his wife, the same mouth that had kissed her forehead with tenderness reserved for lovers. Yet here stood Fawaz, performing the role of concerned friend with the skill of a seasoned manipulator. "I needed to see you," Marwan replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Away from the apartment. Away from her. Something in his tone made Fawaz pause, his police training recognizing the shift in dynamics. The concerned friend facade began to crack as he approached more cautiously, noting how Marwan's grip on the walking cane had tightened. "Marwan, you look terrible. The medication, the isolation. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about." "About what?" Marwan interrupted, reaching into his jacket pocket with his free hand. "About how my best friend has been sleeping with my wife while I recovered from the injury that left me helpless. About how you used my condition as an opportunity to destroy my marriage." The printed WhatsApp messages fluttered to the concrete floor between them like falling leaves. Photographs of Fawaz and Yasmin at the beach scattered across oil stains and tire marks. The evidence that had consumed Marwan's thoughts for weeks now lay exposed under the harsh garage lighting. Fawaz's reaction was immediate and telling. No surprise, no denial, no righteous indignation of the falsely accused. Instead, his hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, his police training taking over as he calculated threat levels and exit strategies. "Marwan, you don't understand the situation," Fawaz began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used with suspects. "Yasmin was lonely, desperate. You were so focused on your pain, your limitations. She needed someone who could." "Someone who could what?" Marwan's voice cracked with months of suppressed rage. "Someone who could betray a friend lying helpless in bed? Someone who could manipulate a woman while her husband fought to walk again." The confrontation that followed was swift and brutal, though not in the way either man had anticipated. Fawaz moved first, using his physical advantage to push Marwan backward against the car. The walking cane clattered away across the concrete as Marwan's damaged spine protested the sudden movement. But instead of collapsing as expected, Marwan fought back with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. What Fawaz hadn't counted on was how months of careful planning had prepared Marwan for this moment. The reduced medication, the secret physical therapy, the mental rehearsal of every possible scenario. When Fawaz grabbed him and tried to force him into the driver's seat, Marwan's resistance was fierce enough to surprise them both. The struggle became a grotesque dance between a uniformed predator and his broken victim. Fawaz's advantages, youth, training, physical health, were offset by Marwan's desperate determination and intimate knowledge of his own limitations. But as they grappled beside the car, reality asserted itself with cruel efficiency. The gunshot, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. A muffled pop that echoed off concrete walls, followed by Marwan's sharp intake of breath as the bullet tore through his already damaged leg. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, dropping him to his knees beside the car as blood began pooling on the garage floor. "I'm sorry," Fawaz whispered, though whether to Marwan or to himself was unclear. "You forced this. You couldn't just let it go." What followed was methodical and clinical. Fawaz positioned Marwan's unconscious body in the driver's seat, arranging the scene with the attention to detail that police training provided. The car engine was started, windows rolled up, garage door closed. Carbon monoxide would do the rest, creating the perfect suicide scene of a depressed man overwhelmed by chronic pain and marital problems. But Fawaz's police experience worked against him in ways he couldn't anticipate. The gunshot wound, meant to incapacitate rather than kill, would prove impossible to explain in a suicide scenario. The blood evidence on the garage floor told a story that contradicted his carefully constructed narrative. Most damaging of all, the positioning of Marwan's body showed signs of assistance that a truly suicidal man couldn't have provided himself. 3 hours later, when Mrs. Ahmed from the third floor discovered the scene after noticing her neighbor's car running in the closed garage, she called emergency services immediately. The paramedics who responded found Marwan slumped over the steering wheel, his walking cane lying beside the car like a discarded prop. The initial assessment seemed straightforward enough. A man with chronic back pain, struggling with depression and marital problems, had chosen carbon monoxide poisoning as his escape from an unbearable situation. The responding officers prepared to process what appeared to be a tragic but uncomplicated suicide case. It was the forensic technician who first noticed the gunshot wound during the preliminary examination. A small, clean hole in Marwan's left leg that was inconsistent with self-inflicted injury. The angle was wrong, the distance was wrong, and most tellingly, there was no weapon present that could have made such a wound. Dr. Rashida Al-Zahra, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, would later testify that the positioning of the body alone ruled out suicide. A man with Marwan's back injury and recent gunshot wound could not have arranged himself in the driver's seat without assistance. The blood spatter patterns on the garage floor told a story of struggle and violence that contradicted every element of the supposed suicide scenario. But perhaps most damning of all was the evidence that Marwan himself had prepared for this possibility. The letter to his sister, postmarked the day before his death, contained not just proof of the affair but detailed descriptions of his fears about what Fawaz might do if confronted. Even in death, Marwan had outmaneuvered the man who thought he could use his victim's weakness against him. The broken man who had watched his life collapse from a bedroom window had orchestrated justice from beyond the grave, ensuring that his killers would face consequences even if he couldn't be there to see them served. The investigation that followed Marwan's death unraveled with the precision of a carefully constructed puzzle, each piece revealing the depth of planning that had gone into both the murder and its exposure. Detective Captain Amira Hassan, a 20-year veteran of Dubai police, had seen enough staged suicides to recognize the inconsistencies immediately. But what she hadn't expected was how thoroughly the victim himself had documented the path to his own destruction. The building's CCTV system became the prosecution's most valuable witness. Footage from 3 different cameras captured Fawaz's arrival at the garage, his careful positioning of the patrol car to block certain angles, and most damning of all, his obvious familiarity with Marwan's physical limitations. The timestamp showed Fawaz had arrived 17 minutes before calling in a wellness check on his friend. Plenty of time to stage the elaborate suicide scene. Ballistics analysis of the bullet removed from Marwan's leg matched perfectly with Fawaz's service weapon, a Glock 17 that regulations required him to account for at all times. When questioned about the missing round, Fawaz claimed he discharged it during a training exercise, but range records showed no such activity on the dates he specified. The lie was small but devastating, the kind of detail that prosecutors use to unravel entire defense strategies. The physical evidence told its own story of violence disguised as despair. Marwan's walking cane bore Fawaz's fingerprints in positions consistent with moving it aside during a struggle. Bloodstain patterns on the garage floor showed spatter from the gunshot that preceded the carbon monoxide poisoning by at least 20 minutes. Most tellingly, fabric fibers from Fawaz's uniform were found under Marwan's fingernails, evidence of the desperate fight that preceded his death. But it was the letter that arrived at Layla Khalil's apartment in Amman 3 days after her brother's funeral that transformed a murder investigation into a story of posthumous justice. The envelope, postmarked the day before Marwan's death, contained 47 pages of evidence that read like a detective's case file compiled by the victim himself. "My injury made me invisible but not blind," Marwan had written in his careful Arabic script. "If you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true." But they underestimated what a bedridden man with time and determination could accomplish. The package contained printed WhatsApp conversations, photographs with timestamps, medical records documenting his vulnerability, and a detailed timeline of the affair that police later verified with shocking accuracy. Most powerful of all was Marwan's analysis of his own situation. "They see my walking cane and think weakness. They see my bed rest and think helplessness. They don't understand that being forced to watch teaches you to see everything." When Detective Hassan contacted Layla, the sister's testimony added crucial context to the evidence. Marwan had called her twice in the weeks before his death, conversations that took on new meaning in light of subsequent events. He'd spoken about feeling isolated, about questioning his wife's behavior, about his growing suspicion that his best friend was not what he seemed. Most importantly, he'd expressed fear about confronting Fawaz directly, worried that a police officer might use his authority and training against a disabled civilian. The arrests came simultaneously at dawn on a Thursday morning. Fawaz was taken into custody at the police station where he'd reported for his regular shift, the handcuffs applied by colleagues who had worked alongside him for years. The sight of a uniformed officer being led away in chains sent shockwaves through the tight-knit expatriate community that had trusted him to protect their families. Yasmin's arrest at her workplace proved equally dramatic. Security footage showed her collapsing in the accounting firm's lobby when detectives presented the evidence of her husband's murder. Her initial denials crumbled when confronted with her own WhatsApp messages, particularly the ones sent in the hours following Marwan's death that showed no grief, only concern about whether their communications could be traced. The community's reaction was swift and unforgiving. Dubai's expatriate circles, built on trust and mutual support, recoiled from the betrayal with visceral disgust. Social media exploded with outrage at a police officer who had preyed on a vulnerable friend and a wife who had abandoned her disabled husband for his killer. The local Arabic newspapers ran headlines that became neighborhood shorthand for the ultimate betrayal: the protector who became predator. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of calculated cruelty that shocked even seasoned court observers. The evidence showed that the affair had intensified specifically during Marwan's most vulnerable period, when his injury left him dependent on others for basic needs. The relationship between Yasmin and Fawaz wasn't just adultery. It was exploitation of a disabled man's trust by the two people he relied on most. The judge, in delivering the sentences, emphasized the aggravating factors that elevated the case beyond simple murder. Fawaz received 25 years for killing a vulnerable person while abusing his position as a police officer. Yasmin was sentenced to 15 years as an accessory, her abandonment of her disabled husband during his greatest need cited as evidence of exceptional callousness. But perhaps the trial's most powerful moment came when the prosecutor read aloud Marwan's final words to his sister. "I may die broken and betrayed, but I will not die silently. My injury took away my mobility, my strength, my independence. But it gave me something more valuable. Time to see the truth and document it for those who will seek justice when I cannot." The case became a landmark in Dubai's legal system, cited in subsequent trials involving crimes against vulnerable adults. Marwan Khalil's name became synonymous with the principle that physical disability does not diminish a person's right to justice or their ability to fight for it. In the end, the injury that had made Marwan vulnerable to betrayal also made possible his ultimate victory. The forced inactivity that allowed his wife and best friend to destroy his life also gave him the tools to ensure their punishment. Even from beyond the grave, the broken man who had watched his world collapse from a bedroom window had proven that justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected.